Before you keep scrolling, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. It doesn't matter if it's midnight where you are or the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. I want to know you're out there, and if this story stays with you the way I think it will, hit subscribe. We put out new stories every week on Velvet Shadows, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Now, let me tell you about the night Claudia Voss sat at the end of a hotel bar in downtown Chicago, ordered a glass of water she didn't drink, and watched her husband of 7 years walk into the lobby with another woman on his arm. She didn't cry. She didn't stand up. She didn't even look away. She just watched. And she made a decision. That decision would take 14 months to carry out. And when it was done, when every piece was in place and every door she needed was open, Marcus Voss would sit in the corner office of the company he had built his entire identity around and realize, for the first time in his life, that the ground beneath him was gone, and that the woman he had dismissed, overlooked, and quietly humiliated for the better part of a decade, had been the one holding it together all along. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Claudia Harmon met Marcus Voss at a pharmaceutical industry conference in Boston when she was 29 years old. She was there representing a mid-sized biotech firm as a junior researcher. He was there as the rising star of Voss Meridian, the specialty drug licensing company his father had founded, and that Marcus had spent the previous 6 years transforming from a modest regional operation into something that made people in the industry take notice. He was charming in the specific way that powerful men can be charming when they choose to. Fully present, funny, asking questions that made you feel like you were the most interesting person in the room. Claudia was not naive. She had grown up in Akron, Ohio, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still found time to sit at the kitchen table with her daughter every Sunday morning and talk about the world. Her mother, Ruth, had taught her to read people early. Watch what they do when they think no one is looking, Ruth always said. That's who they are. What Claudia noticed about Marcus in those early months was that he was at his core a man who needed to win, not in a violent way. Not in a way that ever showed at dinner parties or charity events or the Sunday brunches they started having with his colleagues and their wives, but in a quiet, consistent way, a way that meant he always had to be the smartest person in the confrontation, always had to have the last word, always had to be the one who spotted something first, knew something first, decided something first. She thought she could live with that. She thought that his drive was something she admired, and in the beginning she wasn't wrong. Marcus was exceptional at what he did. He had a mind for deal structure and risk that was genuinely rare, and watching him work in those early years was something she found herself proud of, even as her own career quietly grew in parallel. What she didn't realize, what she wouldn't understand until much later, was that her own competence made him uneasy. Not at first. At first he thought it was attractive. A woman who could hold her own in a room of PhDs, who understood the science behind the drugs his company licensed, who could talk to his research partners in their own language. He introduced her at events with a particular pride that she mistook for partnership. But somewhere around year 3, something shifted. She got a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal on pharmacokinetics and drug interaction modeling. It was not a flashy paper. It was dense and technical, and most people in Marcus's circle wouldn't have understood it, but a few of the right people did, and they started calling her. Not the company. Marcus never said anything directly. That was not his style. But the comments started, small ones, said lightly, over dinner, in front of friends. Claudia tends to overcomplicate things. She's brilliant in theory, just not always practical. She gets attached to the research side. You know how scientists are. He said them with a smile and a hand on her shoulder, and the people around the table laughed. And Claudia sat there with her wine glass and said nothing, because she was watching. She had made herself smaller over the years, not intentionally, or maybe partly intentionally, in the way that you do when you be peaceful, and you don't want every dinner to be a negotiation. She had moved her research consulting practice to part-time when they relocated to Chicago for his company. She had taken on fewer clients. She had stopped mentioning the calls she was getting, the invitations to speak, the quiet conversations with people in the industry who had read her work and wanted to know more about her. She put it all in a folder. Not a metaphorical one, a real one, in a filing cabinet, in the small home office Marcus had once called your little room, with a tone that was somehow both dismissive and affectionate. In that filing cabinet, over the course of several years, Claudia Voss had built something. She had been quietly consulting for a network of mid-size pharmaceutical companies on a proprietary framework she developed for identifying and modeling drug interaction risk at the licensing stage. Exactly the kind of analysis that Voss Meridian depended on, but that Marcus had always outsourced to third parties at significant cost. She had written the methodology, trained a small team, and by the time she sat at that hotel bar, watching her husband cross the lobby with a woman who was wearing a dress Claudia recognized from a shopping bag Marcus had brought home and said was a gift for a colleague's wife. By that point, her consulting practice had been operating quietly and profitably for 4 years. The woman's name, Claudia would later learn, was Petra. She worked in business development at one of Voss Meridian's partner firms. She was 32. She had straight dark hair and the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having been told to make yourself smaller. Claudia didn't hate her. She had thought she would, when the moment came. But sitting at that bar, watching them cross the marble lobby floor, without once looking around. Because people who feel entitled to what they're doing never look around. What she felt was something much quieter than hate. She felt clear. She finished her water. She took the elevator to a different floor than the one Marcus thought she was on. She sat on the edge of the hotel bed in the dark for about 20 minutes, and then she called her mother. "I saw him tonight," she said, "with someone." Ruth was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been waiting for permission to leave," Claudia said, "and I just got it." She did not leave immediately. That was the part that people would later find hard to understand. She went back to their apartment on the north side of Chicago. She made coffee the next morning and handed Marcus a cup when he came downstairs, and she asked him how the conference dinner had gone, and he told her it had run late and that the speakers had been dry, and she nodded and looked at him over the rim of her own cup and thought, 14 months. That was what she calculated she needed, 14 months to restructure her consulting contracts into her own LLC, properly capitalized and independent. 14 months to have the conversations she needed to have with 3 specific people in the industry who had been circling her work for years and whose interest she had never followed through on because she'd been too busy managing a household and a marriage and the low-grade exhaustion of being underestimated. She also called a lawyer, not a divorce lawyer, not yet. A contracts attorney named Simone, who had been a friend of hers since graduate school and who had never once liked Marcus, a fact she had made known exactly once and then kept entirely to herself afterward. "I want to understand exactly what I own," Claudia told her, independently. "Everything in my name. Everything I've built." Simone pulled up her files. It took 3 meetings and a lot of coffee, but what emerged was a picture that even Claudia found striking when she saw it laid out clearly. Her methodology, the risk modeling framework she had developed over the past decade, had been referenced in 7 industry publications. She held 2 pending patents. 3 companies were currently licensing elements of her work, or contracts she had structured carefully, always in her name, always through her LLC once it existed, always separate from anything connected to Voss Meridian. "You've been running a parallel company," Simone said, with something between admiration and amusement. "I've been running a career," Claudia said. "I just kept it quiet." The reason she had kept it quiet was one she didn't fully examine, until later, in therapy, in a small office in Lincoln Park with a therapist named Doreen, who had the gift of asking questions that arrived like they'd been waiting behind a door for years. The reason was grief. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-stage MS 2 years before Claudia's paper was published, and somewhere in that period, the medical appointments, the insurance calls, the research into treatment options, the long drives from Chicago to Akron and back, Claudia had stopped believing that the world would hold still, long enough for her to stand in it fully. She had contracted. She had made herself manageable. She had made herself quiet. But Ruth was stable now, had been for 18 months, and Claudia was no longer quiet. The 14 months passed in the way that months do when you have a purpose, faster than you expect and slower than you want. She signed the lease on a proper office space in the West Loop in month 7. Small, clean, 2 conference rooms, a receptionist named Jory, who was 24 and relentlessly competent, and who had applied for the job because he had read one of her published papers in a class and tracked down her firm through a footnote. In month 9, she had the first real conversation with Callaway Ridge Partners, a health sector investment group that had been making quiet inquiries about her methodology for 3 years. The meeting was supposed to be exploratory. It lasted 4 hours. They came back the following week with a number. The number had 9 figures. She did not tell Marcus. She signed nothing yet. She told them she needed 60 days. They said they would wait. In month 11, she saw a divorce attorney. His name was Gerald Park, and he had a reputation in Chicago's legal community for being methodical, unhurried, and almost unnervingly calm. He listened to everything she told, and then he asked her one question. "Is there anything he could claim you built together?" She thought about it. She thought about the nights she had sat at the kitchen table while Marcus worked late. The weekend she had managed his company's holiday parties, his client dinners, the renovation of the Voss Meridian offices that he had handed off to her because he trusted her taste and her organizational ability and had never once said thank you. She thought about the life she had built around his life, the way women do, invisibly. "No," she said. "What I built alone," Gerald nodded. "Good." Marcus found out about the deal in the worst possible way, which is to say, from someone else. He was at lunch with a group of industry contacts when one of them, a man named Brooks, who ran licensing at a rival firm, and who had, as it turned out, been in conversation with Callaway Ridge Partners himself, mentioned casually that the risk modeling firm he'd been hoping to acquire had just been scooped up in a significant deal. "Some outfit called CHV Analytics," Brooks said. "You know them?" Marcus said no. "Shame," Brooks said. "Their methodology is exceptional. The principal built it over about 10 years. A woman named Claudia Voss. Actually, any relation?" Marcus was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he laughed. "My wife has done some consulting work," he said. "I'm sure it's separate." He called Claudia on his way back to the office. She answered on the second ring. "I heard something interesting at lunch," he said. "Tell me," she said. Her voice was level. "Someone mentioned a deal. Callaway Ridge. A firm called CHV Analytics." He paused. "They said your name." "That's right," Claudia said. Another pause. Longer this time. "What does that mean, that's right?" "It means I closed a deal with Callaway Ridge Partners last week," she said. "It's been in the works for a while." "You didn't tell me." "No," she said, "I didn't." She heard him breathe. She heard the way the silence shifted. That particular silence she knew so well, the one that came with a controlled aversion anger, the version that arrived wearing the costume of reasonable concern. "Claudia, you can't just make a decision of this magnitude without—" "Marcus," she said quietly, "I'd like you to come home at a reasonable hour tonight. There are some things we need to talk about." She hung up. She sat in her office for a moment, in the chair behind her own desk, in the space she had built, and she allowed herself exactly 1 minute of feeling all of it. The years, the small cruelties, the paper she had published, while he was at a conference she hadn't been invited to attend. The folders of work she had kept from him, not out of deception, but out of the quiet, exhausted self-protection of a woman who had learned that her own light made the man beside her dim the switch. She felt it all move through her like a wave, and then she let it go. She had a 3 o'clock call to get on. Marcus came home at 6:15, which for him was early. He came in wearing the face she recognized as his negotiating face, open, measured, carrying the suggestion of generosity even before terms were on the table. She had made dinner. Not because she owed him a meal, because she had always found it easier to say hard things over a table with food on it, and because Ruth had taught her that care and accountability were not opposites. She told him she had filed papers that morning. He did not react the way she had expected. She had prepared for the anger, for the controlled escalation, for the version of the conversation where he pointed out Everything she owed to the stability of their shared life and the platform he had provided. She had prepared for that, and she was ready for it. Instead, he went quiet in a different way, a way she hadn't seen before. "How long?" he said. He was looking at the table. "How long have I been building it?" "About 10 years," she said. "How long have I been planning to leave?" "About 14 months. He looked up. "Because of Petra?" "Petra was a door," Claudia said. "You'd been closing others for years." He didn't argue that, which surprised her. She had been ready for the argument and it didn't come, and in its absence she saw something she hadn't expected to see, something that looked, for a moment, like the man she had originally married. Not the careful, controlled, winning version, the actual one, the one who had sat next to her at that conference in Boston and asked real questions and been genuinely curious about her answers. "I didn't know," he said, "not about Petra. Not about the business. About something else, something underneath, some version of her he had either stopped looking for or never fully seen." "I didn't know who you were." "I know," she said. "That's the saddest part. The divorce took 8 months. Gerald Park was, as advertised, methodical and unhurried, and because Claudia had been careful, and everything she owned was cleanly documented and independently structured, there was very little for Marcus to contest, even if he had wanted to. He didn't contest much. That surprised people who knew him, his colleagues, his friends, the ones who had sat at his dinner table and heard his gentle jokes about how Claudia overcomplicated things. They expected a fight. They expected the version of Marcus who always had to win. But something had happened to Marcus in the months after that dinner conversation. He had hired a business consultant to audit Voss Meridian's processes, something he had always resisted before, and the consultant had come back with a finding that had cost Marcus a week of sleep. The third-party risk modeling his company had been paying for over the past several years, at significant expense with middling results, had been built on a framework that was directly derived from Claudia's published methodology. He had been paying other people to imperfectly replicate the work his wife had been doing in the office he called her little room. He had walked past the answer 1,000 times. He had handed her coffee and asked about her day and introduced her at parties with jokes about scientists, and he had never once opened the door and looked at what she was doing. He settled quickly and fairly. He did not ask for anything. He signed where Gerald told him to sign. The Callaway Ridge deal closed in full 8 weeks after the divorce was finalized. The announcement was covered in 3 industry publications and one piece in the Wall Street Journal's business section, which described Claudia Voss as a quietly influential figure in pharmaceutical risk analytics, who has operated largely below the radar of mainstream industry recognition. The journalist who wrote it had called Marcus's office for a comment, as Voss Meridian was a known player in the same space. His communications director sent back 2 sentences professionally phrased, no warmth. Claudia's mother, Ruth, read the Wall Street Journal piece at the kitchen table in Akron on a Saturday morning, which is where she had always read things that mattered. She called her daughter afterward and didn't say much. She didn't need to. She had been watching Claudia her whole life, and she already knew. Claudia did not move into a bigger apartment after the deal closed. She stayed in the same place in the West Loop, 2 blocks from her office, with the good light in the mornings, and the coffee shop on the corner where Jory always had her order ready before she came through the door. She kept her name. She kept the work. She kept the filing cabinet, the actual one, the physical one, from the home office, because it was the right size for the space, and because every time she opened it, she thought of all the years she had spent filling it and keeping it to herself, and she did not feel bitter about those years anymore. She had needed them, all of them, not because suffering is a prerequisite for strength, but because she had spent those years building something real. And real things take time, and there is no shortcut through the work. She still drove to Akron once a month. Ruth's condition had been stable for over 2 years now, and the drives had become less anxious and more something else. More like the Sunday morning conversations they'd always had, just stretched out along the highway at 70 miles an hour, with good music, and no particular agenda. On one of those drives, Claudia's phone rang through the car speakers. She looked at it for 2 full rings. She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't anything complicated, she answered. I heard you're looking at the Meridian West acquisition, he said. No greeting, old habit. I am, she said. So am I. A pause. The highway stretched ahead of her, gray and straight and open. What are you suggesting? She said. I'm not suggesting anything, Marcus said. I'm just telling you what's true. Another pause. You'd do it better. You'd probably do it better than I. You always. He stopped. She waited. I just wanted you to know that I know that, he said. That's all. Outside, the flat Indiana landscape moved past her windows, bare and honest. I appreciate that, Marcus, she said. And she meant it. Not warmly, not bitterly. Just truly. The way you can mean something when there is nothing left to protect and nothing left to prove, and the only thing in front of you is the road. She turned the music back on after they hung up and drove the rest of the way to Akron with the windows down and the morning coming in cold and clean, and she did not think about what she had lost, because the weight of what she was carrying was already so much lighter than anything she had set down. The work was hers. The name was hers. The road was hers. She looked forward.